Hello, thank you for joining me today. I'm talking about that catastrophic national tragedy we experienced in June 2025. It is exactly a month since AI171 crashed within a minute of its takeoff from Ahmedabad airport. This week, we hear that the Aircraft Accident Bureau of India has shared its preliminary findings based on the black boxes recovered from the crash site with the Civil Aviation Ministry. It's a good time to remember how complex, time consuming, and sensitive these investigation processes are, and how the reputations and commercial interests of a plethora of national and international stakeholders are involved. Founding Fuel has published a set of three painstakingly researched pieces that tell us how these investigations progress and also how this particular one into AI 171 is unfolding. I'm joined by Indrajit Gupta, founder and founding editor of Founding Fuel, as well as Anmol Shrivastava, a tech expert and someone who's worked on putting this report together. IG Anmol, thank you very much for making time for this. And I just want to reiterate how fabulous the work that Founding Fuel has done in explaining the sensitivity and the expertise required to conduct these investigations are. So I just wanted to say that upfront. Let's start though by looking at what we hear news reports say, and that is that the AAIB, that is the Aircraft Accidents Bureau of India, has shared preliminary findings with the Civil Aviation Ministry. What do you make of that?
Anuradha, I don't think this has official confirmation. So this is all source-based stories filed by Reuters.
Yeah.
So one has to add that caveat that they claim that the report will be made public end of the week, which is Friday. Um, but we still don't know because the ministry and the PIB, which is the Press Information Bureau, has not issued any formal statement, which is the pattern that unfortunately we've come to see in this massive tragedy.
Investigation. So, Anmol, if I can bring you in, but if this preliminary inquiry comes to light, or even if it is filed with the government by the AAIB, what does it mean in the timeline of this investigation? This, because I'm guessing, again, based on news reports, that these findings will be based on the black boxes that were recovered.
Yes. So, see, what is our end goal? It is to find out what happened, why exactly it happened, and then how do you prevent it from happening ever again.
Yeah.
Now, as you said, this is very complex. It requires painstaking work. So, unless and until the investigators are very, very sure of something, they wouldn't put that out. So, my guess is if the preliminary report were to come out, you would see some idea of something which they are very, very sure about what happened, but it may not have some sort of analysis to it because that takes a lot of work, red teaming, debating, triangulating. But it helps because at least it gives people some idea of how the investigation is processing and going forward. And the other thing which is playing out is, which might help, is the era of the citizen investigator has arrived. You're seeing so much speculation out there. It's helpful. It may not be helpful, but at least it would focus the conversation even in the public domain because we might have some more clues, right? It's like solving a 1,000 piece puzzle. We know 5, 10 pieces. Maybe we'll know 5, 6 more. So that's what the preliminary report can offer us.
Right. IT, you mentioned upfront that this is a source-based report put out by Reuters and other news news outlets, and we don't know whether it will be made public. These preliminary findings. Why do you think there has been this kind of opacity in the way in the past month, in the way this investigation has been conducted? You all have referred to this in one of the three parts that you've written. Is this par for course for such highly sensitive
Not at all.
investigations, or is this an
Not at all,
area
Anuradha.
specific?
Not at all. It's such a major public tragedy, and the entire world is watching. Travelers are spooked. Regulators don't know around the world what to make of it. There are other airlines following this very closely because they have large fleets of their own with the 787s. So clearly, this is of a scale which is unprecedented, especially since it's the rarest of rare occurrences. Never has there been any such, kind of occurrence of a flight, kind of crash landing after 30 seconds within takeoff, right? So, and dual engine failure as it's claimed, right? So in such a situation, I think there have been lots of calls, both from media, both from regulators, and from other experts, pilots, to really try and quickly release something that calms people down, or do what is the best practice globally, which is to do regular press briefings every day or every other day, so that there is this whole uh, cloak of secrecy is lifted. Right now, we're guessing. All the questions that you asked
Mm.
are, we don't have answers to it. We are guessing merely based on media reports,
Yeah.
which is disappointing.
So, in fact, that brings me back to the three parts that you all released. And Anmol, you used the word triangulation. Do you want to just briefly tell people what kind of complexities, what kind of time it takes to patch together what actually happened, and the different sources of data that would be available to investigators? Because I think it's important for people to know that.
Yeah. So the first thing, Anuradha, air crashes by their nature are supposed to be baffling because we don't see that happening. There are layers and layers of redundancy built in. So if something goes wrong, it usually like is very complicated because it does not happen due to one single thing. Multiple things have to go wrong at the same time in a sort of a deadly chain of events which you have never seen before. So I mean, we pride ourselves as an aviation industry that a safety incident wouldn't repeat. So by that logic, everything is new. Now the second thing is no single source of data can be relied upon. I think this has missed the public narrative because we all feel that hey, if you've gotten the black box, you've gotten the answer. But let's for a second assume a sensor was faulty to begin with. Now, if the airspeed sensor is faulty, the black box would record the wrong speed. So the investigators now have to go back and look at, hey, the data, whether I'm getting it, is it correct? Or is it actually the false data which led to the flight crashing? So now what would happen is they would look at multiple sources. So you have the wreckage, okay? Here you have the two videos. You would have the maintenance record. You would have the cockpit voice recording. You would have human factors there. You would have the weather data. Then there's a black box FDR. So investigators would have to bring all of this together. Let's say you have even assumed that something has happened. You've been able to reconstruct the event. But then why did it happen? Like, for example, one of the theories we are hearing is fuel contamination. But if the fuel was contaminated, how did it miss all the checks? There are
Yeah.
several checks. Second, if the fuel was contaminated, why this specific flight and no other flight? We saw the airport was closed at around 2:30 and was reopened. Then that means there was no initial sort of evidence found. And third, even if it was fuel was contaminated, why both engines at the same time? So the answers are very difficult, and you need to be absolutely watertight because you need to prevent this from happening again. So this requires you to verify it through multiple sources and then dig right into the root cause.
Right. In fact, again, source-based news reportage, IG, there is a conversation now about fuel switches. I even hesitate to use these terms because I've never used them, right? So it feels like you have to be really careful. But now there is some buzz about fuel switches. Anmol just mentioned the theory about was there fuel contamination, but then why did it not affect anything else? Is that mechanical failure? What do you make of these different chains or different theories of speculation? Briefly, there was even some very ill thought out theories being floated about pilot error. We saw that, extremely insensitive at this point of time because we don't know. The bottom line is we don't know.
So this is the tough part that we had to wrestle with, because I think we took a early call that we won't jump in and feed this media frenzy, or social media frenzy if you like, and step back and provide and reframe the story. Because like Anmol was mentioning a little while ago, we don't know the answer. So I mean, it's pointless trying to kind of guess what happened, right? So on the question of fuel contamination, Anmol and I spent some time with someone who's a specialist in aviation fuel for the last since '89, right? That's his job. That's his day job. He's been doing that for years and years. And you've got to understand the system they have in place, because it's high risk. If something were to go wrong on fuel contamination, it can lead to a deadly tragedy, right? So once you understand how the system works and offer that to the audience, and we recorded that conversation, and we'll hopefully do another follow up post shortly. I think we're in a much better position to bring value rather than just latching on to some one you know so-called probable cause, right, which is not helping readers, audiences. If you see some of the documents that have been put in the public domain, right, they are detailed preliminary reports generated through ChatGPT. If
That's
someone who's
just.
a It's just stunning to see the level of detail and the effort that someone has gone through to produce those. It's worrying because we had to, for instance, wade through all of that as part of the thing and strip it clear of misinformation as far as possible and stick to good sources. Curation is important because it's a bit like the blind man, six blind men and the elephant.
Yeah.
Each one is touching one part,
And
right?
that's
And
the elephant, yeah.
yeah, the other is, how do you find human intelligence,
Mm.
good sources, I mean,
Mm.
who can directly validate or build on what we're asking about. So we had to be very careful on that.
So, Anmol, what is the investigation process like? What are some of the steps? I know you've written about it, but for people who have not yet discovered what you all have put together, what are the steps that the investigation follows in normal courses? And also, if we are talking about the AAIB and its preliminary findings being released, where are we at on that investigation process timeline?
Sure. So I think the first step is that the investigators rush to the site and you secure the crash site, because a lot of the clues of what happened is in the wreckage. Uh, Obviously the black box and the cockpit voice recording, but even how did the plane disintegrate? Now in this case we have had two videos, so we know it did not disintegrate into the air, but still they would go in there, and the wreckage distribution, many things of, for example, how did the engines look right after crashing, because if an engine is rotating at full speed, the damage would be very different from how it would look like if it was not running at full speed. So those become very important vital clues, and investigators photograph each of the clues, they mark where it was, and they move it to a hangar. So we are given to understand that that process has largely been like started and completed, and they have moved the wreckage to a nearby hangar. The second thing is, even in this process, there's a method to the madness, because
Yeah.
there are some things which has perishable value, like what did the airspeed indicator look at? Because if you're sort of dousing the fire, those sort of things might change. So they would have done all of that. The second thing is, again, you might look at weather data, because obviously there were clear skies, but it was warm. You would look at some of the radar signals, ATC communications. What did the pilots communicate to the ATC? If there are CCTV recordings, you'd start interviewing people who saw the crash happen. You'd start interviewing pilots who have flown it before. Now, we don't really know exactly what part of it has been completed or not completed. As IG alluded to, there's a lot of silence. We don't even know yet who's leading the investigation. If you compare that, previously it has taken 6 7 days to announce those names. In this case, we still don't know. So what would basically happen is they would start getting all these pieces of data, right? Because it's like a 1,000 piece puzzle, or let's say it's a Rubik's cube. You want to see
Yes.
all the six
Yeah.
sides. So
Yeah.
first you'll get hold of all the six sides, and then you would arrive at, hey, how do I solve this Rubik's cube?
Mm.
So IG and I were focusing on not what the answer is, but how the answer would be
Yeah.
found.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they would piece together all of this, and then basically some sort of an imagery would start forming, right? You would be able to eliminate scenarios, you would be able to say what's likely to happen, and then you would do some sort of guesswork, and which is a scientific guessing, and then you would see if the evidence falls in place, and then you would further strengthen it. So that's the process. I mean, collecting the
And this
data,
could take
analyzing it.
and this could take as long as, how long would this take?
It, you cannot say that it might, you can't even say whether we'll find an answer. You never know. There have been crashes before where we don't know why it happened. So it really depends on what they find.
So one thing,
Yeah,
Anuradha, that
yeah,
has happened,
yeah,
in the 2020 Kozhikode crash,
yeah.
is that the crash committee, investigation committee headed by Captain SS Chahar, was given two mandates. One is to, of course, do the technical analysis of what caused the crash, the root cause analysis, and also suggest long-term measures. Original mandate was, I think, if I'm not mistaken, 6 months, right? And it eventually took 1 year for the full report, very detailed report, which is publicly available on the AAIB site. Now, this time, the government has split the two investigations one which is headed by AAIB,
Yes.
which, when news reports indicate, they have submitted the
And the one
preliminary,
with the high powered committee.
which is due in 3 months' time, which
Hmm.
is headed by the Home Secretary.
Hmm.
Now, there have been some criticism of that structure as well, because at the end of the day, the AAIB needs to have full independence over the investigation. You don't want Big Brother, kind of looking over your shoulder. I'm not alleging anything, but there have been some speculation that this is not the ideal structure, because then they'll have to share their initial findings with people who are not part of the
So
investigations.
I think IG, this brings me, it cues my next question, which is that when something like this happens, there are a lot of reputational and commercial interests at stake, and so many transnational stakeholders. Um, do you want to shed some light on what is at stake? Let's say to begin with Boeing, then let's go to Air India, and then anybody else that falls in line over there.
So we spoke about, I think, primarily three stakeholders. Boeing clearly one of them,
Mm,
because they've been at the eye of a storm for the last several years, especially last year
mm,
when two or three whistleblowers came forward to provide evidence of serious structural design flaws in the Dreamliner. And this was followed up by a American Prospect magazine
yeah,
investigation shortly after this crash, suggesting that even this aircraft, there were serious technical issues which before the delivery, which had to be sorted out. This ill-fated aircraft, particularly, it gives you gooseflesh just reading that.
yeah.
So clearly, this has massive implications for Boeing, because other airlines are waiting to see what emerges from this study, and their fleet delivery schedules, the
Yeah,
order bookings, all of that will get impacted, right?
yeah.
Uh, Second, Air India is in the midst of an incredible transformation, right? After the Tata Group took over,
In
their
2022.
2022 Jan, to be
Mm,
precise,
mm,
they've been trying to rebuild,
mm,
but also pressing the accelerator at the same time on growth.
mm.
This comes at a terrible time for the Tatas, really, because this kind of fear psychosis that one has seen, especially with the wall to wall coverage of this tragedy, has spooked a lot of travelers, right? And raised larger questions about whether about aviation safety in general, and whether the Air India aircrafts and its internal systems and the culture of safety is deeply embedded. There are question marks around it, and didn't help that DGCA was doing
Yeah.
a round of checks which spooked people even further,
Mm,
right? For the government's civil aviation ecosystem,
mm.
you have DGCA, you have AAIB,
Yeah.
and the Ministry of Civil Aviation, who have tried to revamp the ecosystem in the last few years, particularly with a new set of rules that were announced in 2017, the creation of AAIB in 2012,
Yes.
right? And a new DG at DGCA,
Mm,
Faiz Kidwai, who's supposed to be very highly reputed as the Director General of the DGCA. Now, the key is whether they're going to work in harmony or at cross purposes. And this is the first time that a digit black box lab, which was
yeah.
opened as recent as April,
Yeah.
is being tested.
Mm.
And unfortunately, there's been a lot of controversy about that as well,
In
because
fact, there were
based on
reports that even though the lab was there, it was not capable of doing
no,
getting the
so it's
data
a little
out.
tricky. Yeah, it's a little tricky because of the fact that one of the black boxes was damaged. So media reports and the journalists I spoke to, for sure, both of us spoke to, were hearing initial reports that AAIB was actually in favor of sending it to NTSB in Washington. That was, as soon as Economic Times ran that story, there was a clarification from the ministry that it would be done in within India in that same lab that I described, the newly opened lab. Now, the reason why this is important is that one box we know was damaged, right? Now, it is a very intricate process to extract that chip from that box, because some of the circuitry was broken as well. Now, if you mess it up, fortunately, there are two black boxes and not one. But in spite of that, what you don't want happening is that you lose the data because of some error of on your part, right? But they then clarified later. I forget the date. Anmol, was it 26th? They
25th or
confirmed
26th. Yeah.
25th, yeah, 26th, I think, where the ministry put out a official statement after there was lots of criticisms in media about exactly what you mentioned at the start, opacity, and no communication coming out, that they had successfully managed to extract the data in India itself, because there are lots of edits that came out in media, including one in ET, criticizing the government for stoking nationalism and wanting
and
to,
and
you know,
justifiably so. I
absolutely.
mean, the criticism in the edits is
Yes,
what I'm saying is
yes,
justifiable.
yes.
Anmol, you also make an interesting point, which you underline again, which is that even the report writing, and we are far from that stage in the case of AI 171, but even the final investigation report writing is not an easy process. It comes with
Yes.
many, many complexities. A quick word on that, Anmol?
Yes. So I think Indrajit was talking a little bit about the stakes being high, right?
Yeah,
Now,
yeah.
what we've seen in the past is, I mean, people also want to pass off the buck. Like we saw
Yes.
with MCAS, Boeing would say, "Hey, the pilots didn't do their job." The pilots would say, "We were never told about the system
Mm.
exists." So somebody has to now, the committee together has to say, "This is the probable cause. These are the contributory factors." And then it has to be done in a way that tomorrow it's watertight, because your reputation as the investigating agency is also on the line, and your recommendations would follow that.
Yeah.
So I think what usually happens is, once they know what has happened, they would work with the regulator to release some guidelines. Even if they put that together in the report or not, some sort of directives, guidelines, messaging might go if you find something structural. So that's the first part. The second part, then, of course, is that they would put it all of this together, and as a process, and in fact, in the 2017 regulations and also the guidelines, you have to share it with the key stakeholders. So, who are the key stakeholders officially? It's the countries from where the passengers come. So
Yeah.
UK definitely is one. You have the state of manufacture, which is USA, and
USA.
then Boeing and your General Electric. So these are, so these they would have time to comment on the report, and it's a whole different process. But at least as citizens, for us, what is key is the incidents should not happen again. That's the first part. So some sort of guidelines might come out, and then end for our own transparency or closure. We might see the report, and certain things are of course not shared, like because you want to maintain privacy, there are laws. So transcripts of cockpit voice recording, etc., might not come in. But it's a very very difficult process, because you don't want to put blame, but you also want to make sure that you find the how you can prevent it from happening again. So it is
Never again.
complicated.
Yeah. Yes, IG.
Yeah, so I think the point that Anmol's making is important, because unless the head of the investigation, and we don't know who that is
Yeah.
because it's never been put in the public domain, surprisingly, uh, is very confident about defending the evidence-based work that he was talking about. If they're not, it is very hard, because there have been a lot of comments, including from the chief of NTSB in Washington.
Mm.
She spoke to
Yes,
Bloomberg on the sidelines
I've seen
of a
that.
conference, right, saying that quickly put out what the black box, that can in fact cause more trouble actually. So I'm surprised that she actually went out. But don't forget that there was an 8-day delay
Mm.
after the second black box was found. The black boxes were lying in Ahmedabad, apparently guarded in police custody. So God knows why there was that inexplicable delay. So obviously it'll fuel speculation, right? What was the need? It could have been flown directly to either Washington or brought to Delhi. Why is there so much of opacity and tardiness in responding to a crisis of this kind? Beats me.
So when there is so much at stake, IG, commercially, reputationally, politically, is there, would it be fair for people, for the public to say or to be wary of a cover up?
That's a difficult one to answer, but
Sure.
the
I
way
mean, again,
they, yeah, it's a the way the investigation has been done, unfortunately, is not particularly high on transparency. So we used a quote from a very senior journalist in Delhi, who obviously didn't want to go on record.
mm,
He said, "I mean, this government operates on need to know basis.
mm,
In a tragedy of this kind, you can't afford to do that. It's best to be bat on the front foot, put out stuff on the public domain and carry them with you, because you're trying to instill confidence or restore confidence, right? All of us are spooked, right, by what happened. And friends of mine who are now regular travelers, even after this tragedy, say they when they step into the aircraft now, there is complete silence. People are sitting in their seats, and you know how unruly Indians can be when they board an aircraft. Uh, so they're sitting silently right through the flight. You know that it is gotten to them. Clearly, it may take a long while before this kind of this uncertainty lifts.
Right. Let me just put final questions to both of you.
Sure.
Anmol, what are you going to be working on next where this story is concerned? How do you take this forward besides keeping tabs on what is coming out?
So I think we are waiting for some information which gives us clues about what might have happened. And then, like IG and I alluded to, there's a lot of speculation. So
Hmm.
we want to focus on the signal rather than the noise,
Sure.
and with the right principles. So I think the principle we'll stick to is focus on the process of how you would unravel it, and B, once you unravel it, how do you course correct? Because the course correction part is also not easy. Like IG said, it is very, very, very difficult, because sometimes if you find structural issues, I mean, they might have taken place in 2010, 2012. So it's not easy to course correct now. It's a systemic, deep systemic issue. So I think our focus would be around anything which serves the readers well. But we're waiting for some more information, and we're trying to search that up. Like IG said, there's something, we're speaking to a few experts, and we might have something out very shortly.
So two things that we need to kind of focus on, because they were put in the public domain, unfortunately.
Hmm.
Fuel contamination, which we've done the work. I think we're now convinced we understand the system. We've spoken to a aviation fuel expert and an airport operator to understand what really goes on in that value chain, right? The software glitch theory that has also done the rounds requires, because they've been members of parliament we've spoken
Yeah.
to, who are, some of them are pilots themselves, and they insist that something has terribly gone wrong in the and a software glitch may have caused it.
Hmm.
Because typically when something like that happens, and software glitches are not uncommon, because
Yeah.
these modern aircrafts are largely software. A lot of it is software, not hardware
Yeah.
necessarily, right? There is a process to fix that, because Boeing is supposed to put out
Right.
advisories to the airline and to the MRO, which does the maintenance,
Hmm.
to fix that.
Hmm.
If you don't do that, and we did speak to people in engineering as well in Air India, they can lose their license. So because it affects the airworthiness of that aircraft, right? So it's not a simple thing that we can just attribute blame to
Hmm.
someone or the other. Like Anmol was saying, blame attribution is not the purpose, but to get to the root cause,
Hmm.
right?
And the root
So
cause could be in manufacturing, it could be in
design
maintenance, it could be in
could be in
design, it could be,
the
human, it
software
could be,
glitch.
yeah,
Yeah,
it could be any one
it
of
could
these
be.
things. And this
And
is,
you will develop, based on the
yeah,
data, some hypothesis, right,
sure,
of what may have caused it.
yeah,
And like Anmol was explaining so well, that it's not just one cause, it's a chain of events which are
yes,
completely unanticipated,
yeah.
because the redundancies in the aviation business for safety is enormous.
Immediately after the AI171 crash, we have seen the DGCA, crack its whip on Air India. We saw some people being suspended. But then we saw this news report on SpiceJet, and how that has, SpiceJet, and the way it was maintaining its aircraft, and how that the whistleblower there was the maintenance, the company that does its maintenance, which took it to DGCA. Is there a story here? Is there a question here on this, unprecedented growth in India's aviation sector, in the passenger aviation sector, in the way the airlines have been acquiring aircraft, in the growth in passenger numbers? Is there something here on the regulation and safety front that we really need to relook at post AI 171?
Absolutely fair question to ask. And this is the moot point, that this crash, I think, brings into sharp focus the regulatory oversight over a massive, fast growing civil aviation space, right? Um, and I think there have been larger questions, and we're not experts on aviation, but
Sure.
based on the conversations um, that DGCA has been, trying to play catch up, right, rather belatedly after the unfortunate tragedy has taken place, for the good, for right reasons, but carrying out sudden checks on aircraft of this kind will not get to the root cause, as Anmol was describing. Right? Those are rather perfunctory and superficial. Needs to be done, but it's not necessarily going to restore confidence. If anything, it'll spook. So I think there are three areas that need special focus, which has not gotten enough attention. One is flight safety, one is about flight operations, and the other is on pilot training. Right? All those three issues, if you see the DGCA action against Air India,
Mm.
right, have focused on rostering and scheduling, not these core areas.
Yeah.
Rostering and scheduling is peripheral to this crash.
Yeah.
It couldn't have led to the, could have contributed, no doubt, pilot fatigue and everything else. But there are questions now being raised, not just about the SpiceJet issue, which is a maintenance issue, which was kind of treated perhaps very cursorily and rightly so. I mean, that DGCA stepped in and rapped them on the knuckles,
Mm.
but also about pilot training. Because if you're growing pell mell, like Air India was,
Mm.
you want your pilots and your aircraft in the air as quickly as possible and as long as possible. So training is works at cross purposes, right? With that agenda,
Mm.
you because it creates it needs more mandates to
Mm.
get pilots away from their regular work into training, simulator training. It puts pressure on the training pilots, right, to crunch the time because simulator training is very
Yeah.
expensive,
Yeah.
very expensive. And if you just get 4 hours, as a training pilot told us, he's had 30 years plus experience in Air India. He says that, look, the subtle signal was tick the box,
Yeah.
right? Don't necessarily delay and hold the entire system to
Mm.
hostage, which is a departure from, so this calls for very careful balancing between
Yeah.
operational efficiency, growth, and safety.
So then, fair to say that the AI171 crash we'll have to await this investigation so that a tragedy, a catastrophe like this does not take place again. And also whether the civil aviation sector in India is, looked at with a absolute microscopic lens so that every little chain, every little process in this system is completely cleaned up. Fair to say that that's the conclusion at this point of time.
That's what it should be, Anuradha. Are we moving in that kind of direction? That is not clear. I
Sure.
don't think there's been enough communication. Anmol
Sure. Yeah,
wants to add.
Anmol, you want to close this?
Yeah, so I think one very important point is we have to stop being reactive. Like maybe there's a crash and there is one reason why it happened and we might correct that. But why can't we be proactive? If you look at the global order, people's trust in Boeing or USA is already not at the best place. Even China, we know they had a crash, they haven't released, and China in itself
Mm,
does not have that. Why does India have to wait
mm,
and be reactive? We already know that. Do we have the highest safety standards? I mean, the answer is not a clear thumping yes.
mm.
So I don't think we need to
Yeah.
wait for all of this. And if our ambition is so high, uh, things can start moving parallel. It requires intent, and it requires to place this at the highest levels.
Yeah.
Uh, and then there
Fair.
are rewards for it. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think so. That's a good point. Why do we have to be reactive? Why can't we be proactive? And we are capable of being that. It's a good thought today. I don't know what it offers to anybody who's been affected directly by this terrible, terrible tragedy. But like you said in your piece, that the whole point of all of this is that it should not happen again. Thank you, Anmol. Thank you, IG, for this conversation. And I'll
Pleasure.
keep tabs on what you're doing. Hopefully we'll be able to come back to you with founding fuels work on AI 171 crash and the investigation that follows. Thank you.
Thank you for having
Thank
us.
you, Anuradha.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.